The Agenda is powered by DART, Delaware's transit service, moving forward.
Hello and welcome back to The Agenda. This week, the guests are rolling. Just like we said, we're very excited to have you back. Thank you for tuning in. We know you have a choice where you get your news and local information, but thank you for choosing DETV yet again. And so this week, we are excited. Let me tell you something. Widener Law School is coming through. Delaware Law School is here, and they're representing this week on DETV. And today, we have another professor here from Widener Law School, Ms. Keeshea Turner Roberts, Professor Keeshea Turner Roberts. Thank you very much for joining us here on The Agenda. And we also have Ms. Alicia Clark. So thank you very much for joining us. You're going to talk to us about the Black Audit Project here that's not only affecting Delaware, but throughout the country. And some of that is also overseas. So we're very excited to have this conversation. Thank you for coming on the show and telling us a little bit about it. We appreciate it. So, Professor Turner Roberts, please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. My name is, again, Keeshea Turner Roberts. I'm an assistant professor at Delaware School of Law. This is my second year. I am a Virginian. I am new to Delaware. And
welcome.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you. I have the privilege to teach the smartest students in the world.
We've heard that a couple times this week already about the excellent things that's going there, and the student power, as I like to say, not just the brain power, but the student power that's coming out of Delaware Law School.
Yes, and I enjoy it thoroughly. But prior to coming to Delaware, I was a clinician in a clinic, a fair housing clinic at Howard University School of Law. So lots of opportunities, lots of working with students of various degrees and ages. So I appreciate you asking me to come today.
Yes, we really appreciate it. Thank you very much. We want to talk about the Black Audit Project. We want to talk about how the Delaware School of Law is affiliated with that, right? So we're just not using the great minds of the law professors that are there. We're also using students, right? Going out, gathering this information. Ms. Alicia, you're helping with that and helping organize that as well. So tell us a little bit about the Black Audit Project.
Right, the Black Audit Project is a project, and that project, and we're looking at 17 sustainable goals, development goals, and those goals are developed through the UN, and these goals are
the United Nations.
United Nations, of course. They are developed to what a society should have, like all of the means society should have. In other words, like clean water, no poverty, no hunger, those things that we really want our society to be. And they're divided up into 17 categories. In conjunction with the Howard University School of Law, we are working together to gather data. Howard has gathered data in a variety of different states, counties, and also overseas. And I think the most recent one was Puerto Rico. And they really take a look at that region to see whether or not those regions up to snuff with regards to those 17 goals.
So really, I don't know if you can ballpark these 17 goals, but what are we trying to gather? What's the data we're trying to gather from these points and for the betterment of society? Like, what's the goal?
Well, the goal is to see, for instance, with regards to hunger, how is our community, African-American community, how do we fare versus other communities?
Okay.
Right? For instance, if we have a food shortage or food deserts, how many food deserts exist, say, in a predominantly African-American or people of color community versus white communities, right? Okay. What is the impetus of that, right? Mm-hmm. What is the, how many, for instance, bodegas, corner bodegas are there? What is the quality of food of those bodegas? Mm-hmm. How the travel between bodega and, say, for instance, someone's home in a certain community, right? So we're just trying to gauge those points so we can compare our communities to other communities, right? And by doing that comparison, we can hopefully get data and perhaps get funding to make the benefits in that community better. Because ultimately what we want to do is to get information in the hands of people who can do something.
Policy changers, policy makers, people, true decision makers.
But not only that, also the community.
Right.
Right. And I think the community, they know what's best for their community. Right. But I think part of it is allowing them to know this is a project or this is what we're looking for. What is your input? For instance, we had a town hall meeting in February, right? And we had a variety of different questions and also discussions with the community, and they told us what they thought what the issues were.
What were some of those feedback? What was some of that feedback that you got from the community? And I want to ask you, because DETV last year, we did a Christmas initiative on Christmas Eve, right? And we're out Christmas Eve, we're giving gifts, and we said, let me go across the street to the bodega, the corner store, as we call it here in Wilmington, right? Go to the corner store and get something. I walked into the corner store, and there was I looked in the refrigerator, and there was only 3 or 4 different drinks. All of them were colored, red, purple, or what have you.
Right.
There was nothing but sweets on the shelf. It wasn't a store.
Right.
It was a poorly stocked snack stop.
Not only that, it probably was expensive too. The price points probably were outrageous.
I rolled out, so I don't know what the price was, but I mean, I said, how is it that I remember coming up and the corner store was vital,
had everything that you needed in there
for that, and you were sent to get these things, from deli items to breads to flour and all that. None of that was in that store, but it was the only one within blocks of this community.
Right. And some of the individuals that we did interview, they stated that. One says that there's no good food choices, because we know that with a good diet, the more better your diet is, the less you'll get ill. Right. And so a lot of individuals, they have nothing else but to eat sugary snacks or ramen noodles or something like that. Not only that, also it's cheaper to eat those types of food. But in the corner stores or bodegas, as they also are called, those basic items are overpriced, right? And they may or may not be the freshest, right? Produce, right? For instance, if you get produce from a bodega or a corner store, they may not be as fresh if you got it from a Wegmans or another store, right?
Gotcha.
And a lot of also, not only of the foods are not nutritious and the expensiveness of the food, but also the distance, right? You have to travel. Like someone said that it took them 3 to almost up to an hour from this person's home in East Wilmington to go to the nearest bodega, right? And so that literally is the only option that they have. And I think that my students were gonna show and tell you a little bit about that. A lot of the location of these bodegas or corner stores are concentrated in certain parts of the area. Right, in the people of color, African American area, and less so in the more affluent areas.
Let me ask you one more question. Some people may say this sounds like an issue for the Department of Agriculture. This sounds like an issue for social services. Not saying that I'm against lawyers. I'm not against lawyers. But why is it that it takes a bunch of lawyers to go through and kind of bring this to light?
Well, I disagree that it's only lawyers. I think that there's plenty of people, plenty of advocates, non-legal advocates, that's been pushing this agenda, is really pushing this as an important agenda item for years, right? I think that we just have manpower, right? And that's how we look at manpower. We are part of this community as well. And I think, I see our job as educators, right? To educating communities, to empower communities to do things. They can advocate on their own behalf, but they have to know what the issues are in order to advocate.
I love it. I love Delaware Law School and the things they're doing. Briefly, Miss Alicia, please tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got here, and your participation in this.
Sure. So I'm Alicia Clark. I'm the Director of Global Partnerships for the Center for Global Africa. We are headquartered here in Delaware. We have a partnership with Howard University School of Law, Thurgood Marshall Civil Rights Center. We are a pan-HBCU consortium, a 6-region think tank. We focus on academic research and consultancy. Through a partnership that we have with the African Union, which is located in Addis Ababa, East Africa, we provide capacity building support for African development initiatives. And two very important areas that we focus on are Agenda 2063, which is Africa's blueprint for development, and Agenda 2030, which is the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. That's what people refer to it also as Agenda 2030. The UN Sustainable Development Goals have been adopted by member nations of the UN. So globally, countries are evaluating themselves in terms of their progress towards achieving the metrics, the 17 metrics that Professor Turner Roberts mentioned, and they're looking at their progress annually. Mm-hmm. Let me say to you that no U.S. state is meeting the 2030 goals, okay? And there's a report called In the Red, the U.S. failure to deliver on a promise of racial equality, that I encourage your listeners, your viewers to read and look at. And if you look at that report, it will also give you a breakdown of each state within the U.S. so that you can also see specifically how Delaware is doing.
Okay.
And I will say to you that Delaware is not progressing towards the UN Sustainable Development Goals either. As Professor Turner Roberts mentioned, the 17 goals, 17 metrics look at everything from poverty to education to health to economic development, to climate and water quality, housing, all of the important elements that contribute to a quality of life that we all want to have. So going back to the organization that I represent and I'm affiliated with, the Center for Global Africa, we are working on these initiatives on a global scale, at a global level. We have a network of HBCUs, and the experts within those HBCUs, the scholars, the researchers, the academicians that work with us on specific projects on the continent to support capacity development, and as I said, Agenda 2063 and Agenda 2030. Well, this opportunity presented itself for us to work with Howard University School of Law and look specifically at Delaware. We advocated, the center advocated to bring this project to Delaware. And we were fortunate enough to recruit and partner with Delaware Law to launch this pilot. And I'll call it a pilot project because we're really just getting started. Dean Ferris, as Prof mentioned, Dean Todd Clark, who I think was on your show earlier today, Professor Aaron Daly, Professor James May. There are a number of faculty members that are also working with us on this effort. We have a dynamic group of law students, and we call them our scholars, that are working on this effort as well. So I know today we have two students that'll be talking specifically about the work that they did around poverty and hunger. But we also had students that looked at climate change. We had students that looked at education. We had students that looked at health. So there are a number of SDG goals that were examined, but we just scratched the surface. We have more work to do, more research to do. And so this audit project is part of a larger agenda item that Professor Justin Hansford is really moving across the country. And the project is really designed to look at urban cities throughout the nation to determine the conditions of people of African descent. How are people of African descent doing? Because we know that often reports and studies are completed, and the data that's reflected often in those reports gives us an aggregate number. Mm-hmm. Minorities are doing, X percentage, or people of color. But what we're doing is disaggregating that data. So we're drilling down and looking specifically at people of African descent. How are Black people doing in these areas of education, of health, of hunger, of poverty, of economic development, housing, in those specific areas? This data becomes really important and critical because it informs policy, as we said earlier, and it also provides an informed viewpoint in terms of what resources are really needed to address these issues, and what's the source and what's the genesis of it. So a few things we're finding out in this project, in this process, as we're starting out. One, it's giving us a really good look at the data in terms of people of African descent, but it's also telling us where data is not available. And that becomes another issue that we have to begin to advocate about and address, because if you are not collecting data or data is not available, then how can you now address these issues and these challenges?
Great.
Yeah.
I want to talk to you more. We're going to take a quick break right here on the agenda. We're going to come back. We're going to bring some students that are actually out there in the field helping with this and helping us as Delawareans gain more information about our community. We'll be right back right after this, right here on the agenda.
Still searching for cheap gas prices? Dump the pump and ride DART. You can DART to your destination for only $4 all day. Let DART do the driving while you enjoy our free Wi-Fi available on all buses statewide. While scrolling through your favorite apps, don't forget to download DART's free transit app for real-time bus information and enjoy the convenience of contactless fare payment through DART Pass. So what are you waiting for? Dump the pump and try transit. Visit dartfirststate.com or call 1-800-652-DART.
Kerwin Gaines back here on the agenda. Thanks for tuning in. We are still here with Delaware Law School's Professor Keeshea Turner Roberts, and she's brought this time 2 students who are working on the Black Audit and that are really, I guess, entrenched in it, right? I don't want to say doing the work. Everybody's doing the work, but you have firsthand knowledge of what's going on here in the state, and would love for you to tell us a little bit about it. First, we have Mariah MacIntosh and Bianca Gennaoui, right? Yes. Both of these folks are from Jersey, transplants, so to speak, just for educational purposes. Unfortunately, I heard they're going back to New Jersey after this, but we're excited that they're here now. Please tell us a little bit about your experience with the Black Audit.
So I think that one thing to note is that we completely understand, like you said, we're only here for our education, essentially. That's a big problem that comes up. You have people that come for college or law school into a community, and then they're not staying around, but they're also not looking outside of their campus. This project allowed us to get into connection with our community, but more so understand the actual needs of the individuals here and, you know, the issues that are actually facing them. Mm-hmm. These issues, like I know professors talked a lot about food deserts. That's something that some people will say, oh, well, that just means they don't have any access to food. But there are so many things that stem out of that, from health issues. There's obviously the financial aspect of it as well. It is a huge problem, and a lot of people don't realize that right here in Wilmington, that's one of the biggest problems these community faces.
Say that one more time. What is one of the biggest problems? Because I want the politicians who listen to this show, who watch this show regularly, who are always telling us how great everything is all the time. I want to hear specifically from the data. What is one of the largest problems that we have here?
It would be food deserts. So access to not only food in general, but good, nutritious food. It doesn't exist for a lot of communities. Like you said, you went into a bodega yourself and saw that they didn't have the good access to even fruit or even a simple loaf of white bread. Those things don't exist in a lot of those spaces. And if they do,
no fruit.
Exactly. If they do exist, they come at a high price that frankly people can't afford. So people are having to take buses or trains to get where they need to go, you know, to get to the nearest ShopRite or the Acme, and they're being charged even more for healthier food there as well. And then between transportation and having to pay for the food, you're having people making choices, essentially, whether to have, less amount of food, but it be more nutritious, or have more food so that, isn't as nutritious. Like a bag of chips is cheaper in most places than getting a bag of apples. Mm-hmm. And then that creates a whole stem and slew of issues in itself.
Yeah. I can only imagine everything that this data is pouring out, right? And I know we're just kind of skipping over it here for the show, but it has to be frightening.
Well, we even just quickly, some of the data we found is that over 60% of the people in Delaware are living in food deserts, which is a huge number.
60%?
Over 60%, yeah. And what we found is that most of these people it's mostly minority communities. So it's mostly Black and brown people that are facing these problems. And that's very important to understand. Where is the disconnect? Like, why are these communities the ones that are having trouble with access to food? And we found that the bus lines are not direct. They're not direct to the grocery store, so it takes a longer time to get there, and it's expensive, and a lot of the time they are forced to then go to the corner stores that we mentioned before. And because they're prevalent, but they don't have the things that people need to make nutritious meals. And that, like Mariah said, that bleeds over into then health. It's more expensive to shop at these other stores. You can't really get things in bulk. So if you have a bigger family, you're spending a lot more money for the same products. And it's over 60% of people here that are living in a place where their census tract doesn't have a grocery store in it.
I think one of the big things that pop into my mind as a constituent here in Delaware, as a taxpayer here in Delaware, as someone who ventures to the supermarket quite a bit here in Delaware with 3 teenagers, the transportation. I couldn't imagine trying to feed my family without having a car or some type of solid transportation to get back and forth. And that plays a big role. When you can only take what you can carry, and then you have limited choices on top of that, that's huge. That's huge. And especially if we're going to talk about perishable things and things like that, because how long is the trip home going to take? What is the climate of the walk home? Yeah, I'm pretty sure now in Delaware we can't have plastic bags anymore, right? I think we have some type of plastic bag substitute or what have you. But, so you got to have the brown bag it, right? But it's raining. So are you taking certain things? That plays a factor into my family's nutrition, right? So these food deserts are huge issues. And they're not ones to be taken lightly. And from the small research that I've done in regards to food deserts, they're in unlikely places. Like you would, in places that you would think like, wow, that's a food desert? Like, yeah, that's a food desert.
It'll be in the middle of a city.
Right.
And you wouldn't think that. You'd think it's accessible, you can walk, you can go places, but the grocery stores aren't there. That's the issue. You could be, and some of the communities in Wilmington, there's not a grocery store for a mile away, or you have to take the bus to get there, or it's impossible to walk because there's no sidewalks. You don't want to be walking on Concord Pike to have to get to a grocery store and then have to walk back with all your groceries.
Right.
So transportation is a big problem, which was actually brought up by some of the residents in the town hall meeting as well.
So tell me a little bit about downstate, right? What are you seeing down there? Like, it's easy for people to say, oh, it's food desert because it's more rural and, there's more space in between, but are we seeing that there as well?
So there are also food deserts in more southern Delaware. It's not as much as a problem because a lot more people in those areas have cars because when they're detached.
The lack of public transportation in the southern counties, so they have no choice.
Yes, so it's still an issue. The grocery stores are now further away, whereas here they're not as far. It's just hard to access them. There, it's more of a problem of distance. So it's definitely still is an issue there, and there's less public transportation, so it's harder for people to get there. But a lot more people own the cars and are able to go to the grocery stores. It's just then you're driving further. You're driving 20, 30 minutes, which doesn't seem that long, but...
Oh, yes, it does.
It's a long time to go to the grocery store.
Yeah, and then you're going to throw in transportation costs, right? So
yes.
Fuel.
Yeah.
That's a big thing. Now, 30 minutes to get to the grocery store, that sounds like an hour round trip where I come from, right? So, wow, that's a costly thing at $3.75 a gallon for regular fuel this week or something around there, right? So taking that into an account. Now, building a correlation or contrast between the quality of food upstate, downstate, the quality of the stores upstate, downstate. Did you see any variance there at all?
So most of our research focused right here in Wilmington, just because, we were originally split up into the 3 cities, but due to time constraints, we focused here. Here we noticed, obviously, like we're saying, that they had the bodegas in some areas, which didn't have access to good things. And then in other areas, you had to take all these trains and everything to get to buses to get to a bodega alone, known like a food store, like the Acme on Concord Pike, or even the Acme down in Charlie Square. Those things weren't accessible. And those are the places where you're getting nutritious food, where you have access to more choices, but they're also more of the expensive stores. You know, like we always talk about, we frequent Trader Joe's because it's a minute from the law school. We have more affordable options.
But the stuff in there won't kill you either.
Exactly. It's better food quality. It's less money for us to spend as law students, but then these individuals are mostly faced with choices of going to Acme, which is no surprise is more expensive than going to a small store like that, or even going to like an Aldi or a similar shopping experience. Downstate, they seem to have a different selection of food stores. So they still have the Acmes, they have the Wegmans, Food Line comes up at some point, and they even have the Aldis. I just drove down Route 1 yesterday, all the way through the entire state of Delaware, and I saw all these places, but again, the access to them is very limited. You have to make that trek. And there are communities that are lucky enough that they have that transportation themselves through the cars, but the train lines are still there. They're just not very well utilized or maintained or accessible for people. And there still are people there who can't get access to these places.
As a Delawarean and someone who deals and dabbles a little bit in politics, obviously, I'm always about mitigation, right? I didn't like the fact that we didn't score well as a state on, I don't care about how well New Jersey did, but Delaware didn't score well. What can we do? I know Professor Turner Roberts, you spoke about Senator Brown is working on Senate Bill 254 that's dealing directly with food and food deserts and almost equity in regards to food distribution in our areas. But what are we doing? Do we have a plan of attack for remediation?
So there are a lot of private organizations and even government organizations that are doing a lot to try to mitigate the problem immediately, like putting together boxes of food and then delivering them to people who are in areas with food deserts. And I think the next step would just be, I mean, there's big picture things you can do, like...
And that's what I'm, like, I love the fact that we're going out, we're delivering food to people, but to me, that seems like a patch.
Yeah, it's a patch on it. It's a temporary fix for the overall problem. So, like, the big picture things would be give tax incentives for somewhere like Aldi or somewhere that has cheap, fresh groceries to be put in somewhere where people need it. Like, another thing we talked about was doing a free direct bus line to the grocery store. So it might stop at 1 or 2 apartment complexes at a time and pick people up in these communities and then drive directly to the grocery store to bring down on time and costs of getting there. But I think the most important thing in moving forward at all is ensuring that the community is engaged in whatever changes are happening, because they know what they need and they know where they need it. And we found that out at the town hall because there was a lot of audio tapes of kids as young as high school kids, 15, 16, 17 years old, telling us, we don't have access to cars. Nobody in our family has access to cars. And the closest grocery store is 2-3 miles away. How are we supposed to get there?
Shoulder shrug. What are we supposed to do?
What are we supposed to do? Like, they know what they need. That's where we kind of come in and work with those community organizations that are already trying to patch up the problem and fix the problem immediately and turn that into a more long-lasting fix. So bringing in the community and asking, what do you need? Where do you need it? And what is going to help this community develop and grow rather than just put a Band-Aid on the problem for now.
I love it. Ms. MacIntosh, as a third-year law student, what would be a suggestion to the legislators that are watching here today in regards to remediation to some of the issues in which you've discovered in your research?
So I think that exactly what Bianca said, you can incentivize these corporations to come in and become engaged in the communities. If you look around Wilmington, it takes as simple as looking at a map, going outward and looking at even Newcastle County, and you can see where the grocery stores are. They're in predominantly white areas. You go to North Wilmington, you have access to every grocery store under the sun, and I'm pretty sure they're putting in a few more. But when you come downtown, you have an Acme and Charlie Square, not really anything else. The solution to, build access to these things is to put grocery stores in place where they can be. Now, we recognize that obviously that might mean that some people can be displaced. Grocery stores need buildings to go places. Hopefully, that can be mitigated through other means as well. But you have to take into account that these people, not all of them down in these areas, but some of them, they're also taking they have to use food stamps and programs like that to help them get food. They need places where they can utilize that as well. So it's not necessarily just incentivizing anybody to come in, but incentivizing corporations that can actually stay here and help the citizens have access to food, good food, nutritious food that can help mitigate so many things outside of this. Like I said, there are so many health effects even to these citizens based on their access to food alone. There are health concerns from your heart to your lungs to everything basically can spiral down if you don't have access to good food.
Especially when you're talking about dealing with children, right?
Yes.
And it's just not adults. These are growing children that have a nutritional standard.
But not only that, I think with these corporations coming into the community, also hire from the community. So you're providing two things. Several things. You have community input, you have community buy-in, and also they can shop by where they live, right? And also they can provide an income that wasn't there.
I love it.
And so there's different ways and incentives through tax incentives. I know in DC for instance, the development in Southeast, that's all they did, right? The deal is if there was a Food Lion or a Wegmans coming into the community, they have to hire at least 10% of the community, right? And so there are ways to not only bring the product that they need, but also employ the people who actually live in the communities.
And I think a big part of that is it would help break a lot of the generational issues that come in. You have generational health problems because there hasn't historically been access to nutritious foods, the same way that you have generational employment issues. There are just not enough jobs. And that brings in jobs to help break those cycles as well.
Right. So much information here. I wish we had more time. But that, what that means? That means that's an invitation back right here on the agenda. We thank you so much for taking the time today to meet with us. I am inspired by the products that the Delaware Law School is producing. We have two great examples, recent third-year law school students here. I wish you nothing but the best on your continued career. Good luck on the bar.
Thank you.
Let's get honest. Good luck on the bar. And I hope it goes well. Professor Turner Roberts, thank you so much for joining us here today on the agenda. And thank you very much for joining us yet again here on the agenda another week. I'll see you next week. Thank you.